The next time someone talks about Rome as if no one could truly resist it, remember her name: Amanirenas. Around 25 BCE, while Roman forces were distracted, Amanirenas launched a surprise offensive into Roman-held territory. Under her command, Kushite forces struck Aswan, Falah, and Elephantine. They raided Roman positions, took captives, and shattered the illusion that the south would simply submit. According to later evidence and tradition, Kushite forces also carried off a bronze head of Augustus from a statue in Roman, Egypt, an object eventually found buried beneath temple steps at Meroe, where people would have walked over the emperor's face. That image alone tells you how this war was understood in Kush, not as defense only but as humiliation of empire. That is the scene: Rome's emperor symbolically underfoot. And this is the part that makes the story unforgettable. Amanirenas was not fighting from fantasy. She was fighting from disadvantage. Kush was smaller than Rome. Rome had more manpower, more resources, more international reach. This was not a fair fight on paper. And yet Amanirenas chose resistance anyway. That is what makes her dangerous. She was not reckless. She was strategic. Rome expected another easy submission. Instead, it met a queen with one eye, a war-hardened kingdom, and absolutely no intention of kneeling. Her name was Amanirenas. And while most people are taught about Caesar, Cleopatra, and Augustus, almost nobody is taught about the African queen who looked at Rome, the most feared empire on earth, and chose war. Amanirenas ruled the Kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now Sudan, during the late 1st century BCE. After Octavian's soon-to-become, Augustus defeated Cleopatra and Mark Antony in 30 BCE and turned Egypt into Roman territory, Rome began pressing farther south toward Nubia and Kush. That is where this story begins, not in weakness, not in retreat, but at the edge of empire where Rome thought Africa would bend and Kush decided it would fight, and Kush was no minor kingdom. This was a powerful Nile civilization with wealth, military tradition, and a long history of strong female rulers. In fact, the title Candake, often rendered as Candace in Greco-Roman sources, was already associated with ruling queens in Kush. Amanirenas was stepping into a political culture where female authority was not some shocking exception. It was real power. Now pause on that, because this already breaks the script most people were given. Ancient Africa is too often presented like background scenery in someone else's story. Rome is centered, Egypt is centered, Greece is centered. Africa is treated like the edge of the map. But Amanirenas was not living on the edge of history. She was about to make history, and she did it at the exact moment Rome thought it was unstoppable. By the time Amanirenas rose to power, the Roman machine had already swallowed Egypt. Augustus was consolidating control. Roman officials were moving south. Taxes were being imposed. Pressure was building along the frontier. And in Rome's mind, this was probably simple. Take the land, intimidate the people, and let the empire keep rolling. Amanirenas had a different idea. Hit first, hit hard, and make Rome feel it. She understood something every serious leader understands. If a growing empire is not checked early, it becomes harder to stop later. So she forced Rome to answer her. And Rome did. The Roman prefect Gaius Petronius marched south with a large force to punish Kush and restore Roman authority. He retook territory, moved through the frontier zone, captured Primi's modern Qasr Ibrim, and advanced toward Napata, one of Kush's royal centers. The Roman version of events, especially through writers like Strabo, tries to preserve Rome's dignity. But even inside that version, the core truth survives. Amanirenas was serious enough, destructive enough, and effective enough that Rome had to mount a major response. And Strabo leaves behind one detail that hits like a cinematic close-up. He describes her as a masculine woman with one eye destroyed. Think about that image. A queen, wounded, still commanding, still resisting Rome. Whether that injury came before or during the war, it became part of her legend. And legends matter because they tell you how a ruler was remembered, not as ornamental, not as symbolic, but as battle-tested. But here is where the story gets even better, because this is usually where empire stories end. The small kingdom resists, the great empire crushes it, history moves on. That is not what happened here. Yes, Rome pushed back. Yes, the fighting was brutal. Yes, parts of the record are still debated because most of the written evidence comes through Roman sources and we still cannot fully read long Meroitic prose texts. But when the dust settles, the final outcome is the part that matters most. Kush remained independent. By 21 BCE, both sides were exhausted. And that is when Amanirenas did something just as powerful as going to war. She negotiated from strength. She sent emissaries to meet Augustus at Samos, and the settlement that followed was strikingly favorable to Kush. According to the surviving account, Rome canceled the tax imposed on Meroe and pulled its occupation line back toward the Egyptian frontier, effectively conceding ground rather than extending deeper into Kushite territory. However incomplete the treaty details may be, historians point to the outcome as evidence that Amanirenas' resistance produced real gains and preserved Meroitic sovereignty in Lower Nubia. Read that again in plain language. Rome came south, Amanirenas hit back, Rome retaliated, and in the end the African kingdom was still standing and Rome was the side making concessions. That is not the version of ancient history most people grew up hearing. And that is exactly why her story feels so electric once you finally hear it, because it exposes how selective historical memory can be. People know Boudica, people know Cleopatra, people know countless Roman generals. But Amanirenas, the queen who forced one of the greatest empires in history to rethink its advance into Africa, she is still missing from most conversations, and that absence matters. Because when certain names are left out, entire mental maps stay broken. If Amanirenas is missing, then Kush is easier to ignore. If Kush is ignored, then ancient Africa looks smaller than it really was. And if ancient Africa looks smaller, then the old lie survives a little longer, the lie that Africa was mostly acted upon, rather than acting. Amanirenas destroys that lie. She shows you an African state thinking strategically, using force deliberately, and defending sovereignty against Rome itself. She also reminds you that African queens were not decorative footnotes to male power. They could rule. They could command armies. They could shape diplomacy. They could decide whether a frontier burned or held, and Kush was not alone in that broader pattern. Across African history, women ruled as pharaohs, warrior queens, kingdom builders, and defenders of sovereignty. Amanirenas belongs in that line, but she stands out because of the enemy she faced. Rome, not a rival village, not a regional chief. Rome, and she did not disappear beneath it, she made it stop. Now here is the emotional core of the whole story. Imagine being told over and over that civilization, strategy, and military genius belonged somewhere else. Then imagine learning that an African queen in the 1st century BCE launched a cross-border war, humiliated Roman authority, survived the counterattack, and secured a peace on terms that protected her kingdom. That is not a side story. That is world history. And maybe the reason it hits so hard is because Amanirenas feels instantly recognizable even now. She is the leader who refuses the script written for her. The ruler who understands that fear spreads downward unless someone interrupts it. The woman who turns a border war into a statement, "We are not yours." That is why her story has survived, even in fragments, in Roman texts, in Meroitic memory, in the bronze head of Augustus, in the title Candig, in the fact that Rome did not simply roll through Kush and erase it. The fearless African queen who went to war with Rome, one eye lost, kingdom under pressure, empire at the border, and still she chose not surrender but struggle, not silence but defiance. Not legend for legend's sake, but action strong enough to become legend. And once you know that, you start to see ancient Africa differently. Not as a shadow beside Rome, but as a power that could answer Rome and survive. Subscribe to Ancient Africa Explained for more stories like this.